any kind of party ideology that links itself to faith tends to then have an aggressive approach towards minority groups. We've seen this in many parts of the world, and we are seeing it in a really ugly form playing out in Bangladesh. Our government presided over enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. And these are things that have really hurt Bangladeshis. A law and order crisis often happens when people believe that there is not going to be justice.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to look at Bangladesh today, or more particularly, what has played out in that country in the past week, ever since Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled Bangladesh and sought refuge in India. We've seen people go after members of the Awami League and several businessmen and other people in positions of power and influence associated with the previous establishment and with Sheikh Hasina's government being attacked. We've also seen in the past week attacks on the Hindu minority. There are many videos of shops and homes that have been vandalized, burnt down, looted, and there are videos that show, and there are reports that suggest that women are being attacked. So they're being picked up, raped, and people have even been killed. Not all these videos and reports are verified, but there is a lot of violence across board in Bangladesh, and Hindus have been under attack, and so have other minorities. To get a sense of what is happening, to understand how Bangladesh reached here, and to also see how India is dealing with it, I am talking today to Meenakshi Ganguly. She's the Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch. Hi, Meenakshi, thank you so much for making time. I'm guessing that this has been a particularly intense and very, very disturbing time for you and your team at Human Rights Watch.
Yes, it has been extremely busy, and I suppose been both euphoric and now disappointing for many Bangladeshis.
Tell us, what is the picture in Bangladesh right now on the count of violence, on the count of human rights under direct threat at this point? What are you hearing from your team on the ground?
Well, we are very glad to see that the new interim government is committing to human rights, is committing to inquiries. There have been some reforms already. There have been steps taken to try and address the situation. But today what we are hearing is that some policemen are returning to duty. But it has been a complete mayhem over the last week because police officers were not coming to work after Sheikh Hasina left because there was reprisals against police officers for the abuses that occurred during the protests. And people were attacking police stations. A number of policemen were killed. So they were not just coming into work. And now we hear that at least about 70% of police stations are functioning, although still at a very, very basic level. This is dangerous because when crimes occur or when there are violent attacks, people have nowhere to go if the police is not functioning.
So we saw, and it was very clear that in the immediate aftermath of Sheikh Hasina fleeing, that everybody connected with her party, that's the Awami League, were targeted. So leaders, businessmen, people in positions of power and who were closely associated with the establishment. And like you just mentioned, police who were executing the orders they received from Sheikh Hasina's government and attacking the protesters, which included students, and and quite brutally. But in the past week also, Meenakshi, there have been many, many instances, and we are seeing social media is flooded with a lot of reports and videos that show that Hindu minorities are being targeted very, very directly. What can you tell us about that?
Well, one, I would almost always warn against any kind of videos because these spread very quickly and are often not confirmed and verified. And what happens is that people who see these videos get very triggered and they get very upset. We're seeing that in India, for instance, because of course people are getting upset at reports of these kind of abuses against other Hindus. And so I would really warn that there are often videos that are not verified, and would warn against influencers who share these kind of videos without verifying them. That said, there have been a lot of violent attacks on on Hindus and other minorities, but particularly Hindus. Initially, what happened was that after Sheikh Hasina left, there were celebrations. Then, and in almost all these such mob situations, there are always elements of triumphalism, violent triumphalism. And if a mob is not contained and given function, it tends to turn nasty. So initially, it was overrunning the prime minister residence, and was toppling statues. Then they started attacking public offices, and gradually that turned into even more violent attacks. And there have been a number of cases that we've been hearing about, including people who, for instance, supported a tribunal to prosecute war criminals from the 1971 war. Professor Hussain has written to us saying that he was beaten up. Hindus we've been talking to have been saying that people came in chanting slogans against Awami League, and then they said, "Oh, you Hindus, you supported Awami League," and then they turned on them, burned their shops, attacked their properties, sometimes beat them up. So it is a situation that is very volatile and one that must be contained. We are very glad to see that there are the political leaders across party lines, and as well as civil society activists, even student leaders have criticized this. Professor Yunus himself has called for calm, and we hope that this will start bearing some positive results. And of course, all the families that have been attacked must receive justice. There are many Hindu groups are protesting in Dhaka right now, seeking justice and protection.
There are people who seem to imply, there are reports that, that are using words like ethnic cleansing of Hindus, genocide. I understand that we must look at them with great, with very, very carefully and not rush to any conclusions. What do you make of these statements and claims that are being made in the context of the attacks on Hindus, and and claims that these are religion-based attacks and attacks for being Hindus rather than just being supporters of the Awami League?
What we are asking for, Anuradha, is that as soon as peace is restored, there is a proper investigation. There has to be an investigation into the excesses against protesters by the Hasina government. There has to be an investigation into these kind of violent attacks that the protesters or so-called protesters themselves engaged in. From what we do understand, however, there are various kinds of groups that are operating. Initially, it was protesters who were triumphalist protesters who were trying to then turn to supporters of Awami League, in which case also Hindus came in. But actually, a large number of Awami League supporters and party members were also attacked, as were the police. Since then, we've also heard about cases where there have been extremist groups that have joined in these attacks, and that we have, and all of this, we have to understand that in any kind of party ideology that links itself to faith tends to then have an aggressive approach towards minority groups. We've seen this in many parts of the world, and we are seeing it in a really ugly form playing out in Bangladesh. But I think what we need to be very careful about is that we do not start a process of Islamophobia. These are small groups. We have also seen religious leaders trying to protect Hindu sites and Buddhist sites. We have also so we should also take the whole thing into consideration instead of just creating, particularly because you will be watched by an Indian audience, to not create a climate of Islamophobia, because that will only lead to further violence, because there will be people who will be triggered over here into reprisals against Muslim minorities over here, and that is not helpful to anyone. At the end of the day, what we want is calm.
Absolutely. And, I completely understand the caution that you're asking everyone to exercise. And yet, I just want to labor one point, and that is there seems to be a suggestion that the acceptance of the fact that Hindus have been targeted was something that, that people were slow at. Precisely for this reason. So do you think that there has been some erring on the other side, in the sense that, in order to ensure that you're not stoking any fears or fear mongering and creating disturbance and panic, that the kind of assaults that have happened on Hindus in Bangladesh did not get acknowledged quickly enough, and it is only because of some social media entities that this then came to light, or then this got the kind of importance that it deserved?
No, that is not actually true, because when Hindu properties were attacked, because don't forget that there was complete breakdown of law and order. There wasn't a government in place. So there wasn't as much information coming through. But we immediately saw the attacks on Hindu properties in Dhaka, and that was reported right away. And we were acknowledging it and flagging it immediately. We were talking in terms of violent reprisals against anyone that is seen to be an Awami League supporter, because that is not what the students fought for when they were trying to reverse a repressive rule. We cannot replicate,
What you've
answer
taken
one
down.
against
Yeah.
another. Yeah. So therefore, that is what the initial messaging was and still is. That of course has to be the messaging, but that does not mean that we do not call immediately for protection of Hindus, and then for investigations into all these allegations of violent attacks, and the fact that everyone should be prosecuted. I also would warn that there are as ever in these kind of situations lots of conspiracies that play out. So we will also hear stories about how India is sending its agents to try and attack Hindus so that it makes people miss Sheikh Hasina and make Sheikh Hasina's government look good. We've heard rumors that Awami League people are going and doing these attacks again to make the opposite, the protesters look bad. So these are not particularly helpful, because what is happening in all of this is that an extremely vulnerable minority community is feeling even more threatened. And therefore, the focus really needs to be on trying to protect that community and to then eventually ensure justice for that community.
So, how does Human Rights Watch work in this kind of a vitiated scenario? Given that you need to keep tabs on what is happening, and given that this is the context in which all this plays out, how do you ensure that people whose rights are being violated, people who are being the target, who are the actual targets, are protected?
So, at this point of time, I have to say that one of the things that has helped a bit is that the internet has been restored. So we are able to reach communities in a way to try and figure out what is happening. But more than that, as of now, because we also rely on official documents, we do not just go and say, we will verify official numbers and then we'll come back to say whether there's been a cover up or not. At this point of time, none of that is happening because police stations are not functioning. But we are also seeking an UN investigation into all these incidents for that reason, because we do understand that in Bangladesh, it is very politically divided. People are either Awami Leaguers or BNP or Jamaat, and they don't seem to ever agree on a lot of things. And therefore, while we welcome the fact that all these political leaders have spoken out right now to call for calm, we still do believe that an independent investigation is the only way forward to ensure that victims get justice.
Do you have any numbers and of the people affected, the kind of crimes that have been committed? Because we know there is a figure of about 200 plus 230 people reported by Prothomalo as the number of people who've died in the past week. And of course, there have been about 400 or so who've died previously since July. But is there, in the past week, do you have any numbers to show the scale and the kind of crimes that have been committed?
We don't have the numbers apart from the ones that have been pulled together. Literally, Prothomalo does it through hospital records, and so we are going with that, which is over 200 people have possibly lost their lives since Sheikh Hasina left, and of course the numbers before that have also not been collated. Because before that, what was happening was that a lot of people with injuries were not even going to hospitals because they were being arrested from hospitals as protesters. So they wouldn't go to hospitals, and therefore we assumed that the numbers of casualties is actually much higher. All of this will need investigation. All of this, and we're very glad to hear even the army chief talk about how every death shall be accounted for, and that has to happen.
The Economic Times today had a report saying that Sheikh Hasina has made a statement, and it seems to suggest that she left because the US instigated this regime change, and she's also beseeched her countrymen not to fall prey to radicalism. Tell me, do you see Sheikh Hasina's continuing stay in India having repercussions for the safety of the Hindu minority there? Because there seems to be reports that suggest that Hindus were seen as being supportive of her.
Yes, the Hindus were not only seen as being supportive, but there are a number of factors that we need to be very careful about, and the Indian government needs to be very careful about. One of the things, for instance, and this is this terrible world of trying to justify crimes by alluding to others, right? So they will. So there are allegations of, oh well, Muslims are attacked in similar ways in India. We've heard some people say that as well. We have heard that India is often blamed for allowing Sheikh Hasina to get away with yet another student election in January. So it is for India, and we have to sort of try and convey to Bangladeshis that India stands for human rights and for democracy and not for a political party over another political party, because that, of course, is the business of the Bangladeshis to decide who chooses to lead them. The Prime Minister has actually said this already. So we are seeing from the political leadership this type of commentary. It is important that supporters of the BJP often or others who are on social media take his lead and follow his lead, because that is responsible leadership in a neighborhood where India has a very prominent role. In terms of who else may have been involved in her loss of power, it's not a human rights issue to an extent. We are not really involved in the strategic side of things. But I will say this: Sheikh Hasina needs to take a really good, strong look at her own record. It is nobody's case that Sheikh Hasina did not want the best for Bangladesh, but she's presided over a parliament that was almost always Awami League, almost 100% Awami League, which means that people who didn't have political representation in parliament, because each time her government would not allow for a free and fair election, or the 3 consecutive elections where there was no opposition representation. That is a really serious thing. Her government presided over enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings, and these are things that have really hurt Bangladeshis. So one of the first things that happened after she left was that people started going off to the military camps and asking for secret detention centers to find their loved ones. And you will see videos of people entering these camps because the military is now releasing some of these people. It is very important that these kind of issues that occurred under her government are acknowledged by her as mistakes. Because if she doesn't do that, she will not, she has a political career ahead of her. There is going to be another election. I'm sure the Awami League will be wanting to take part in that election. And to do that, one of the first things that should happen are the mistakes that should be acknowledged. When these disappearances to occur, we would go and speak with her government. They would be so horrible. They would say things like, "Oh, they're running away from deaths. They're having an affair. They're hiding in India. They're all criminals." This kind of and sort of dismissing distraught family members who were looking for answers. Killings were almost always described as crossfire killings, although we knew that these people had been taken into custody. And then, of course, there was this whole thing of freedom of speech and expression. Anyone who dared to criticize her or anyone that chose to criticize her was immediately either a traitor or a terrorist or an opposition supporter or a Rajakar. There was just no freedom of speech or expression, and that too is a terrible way to run a democracy. So these are things that Sheikh Hasina and her cabinet and her party leaders need to really evaluate instead of trying to point fingers at other people, because people were angry. And that is why she left. It wasn't just a political thing, because opposition parties have tried to conduct these kind of protests for a long time. Yet this time, despite curfew, on the morning that she left, people had defied curfew and were coming in tens of thousands towards Dhaka, which is when the army said, there's no way that we can ensure that your protection or the fact that we can control this crowd. And that is why she had to leave. So she has to understand that. That is people's anger. And she has to understand why people were angry.
You alluded to Prime Minister Modi's tweet, where he congratulated Professor Yunus for taking over the leadership. And he also very categorically said that he hoped for an early return to normalcy and, at the ensuring the safety and protection of Hindus and all other minority communities, and how India remained committed to working with Bangladesh to fulfill shared aspirations. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar spoke in Parliament. There was an all-party meet. All the statements coming out of the Indian government, both in Parliament and outside, have been very muted and have been very measured. Um, is it, and you want that to be the cues for anybody who claims or seeks to stand for Hindu rights in India, right?
I really welcome that the Prime Minister of India chose to mention minorities. Because when other countries mention minorities in India, then, or when civil society tries to defend rights of minorities in India, they're told to go to Pakistan and called traitors. This is the kind of leadership that the country needs, where governments will care about minorities everywhere, including in their own country. And we need to see this in the context of what is playing out in the UK right now. So around the world, governments need to take the lead in defending minority rights and defending refugee rights and defending the rights of migrants, and not feel so prickly when other countries remark upon and call for these same protections. So just as we are very glad that the Prime Minister has said this, and it will carry a lot of weight. India has a lot of influence in Bangladesh, so it will carry a lot of weight, and we welcome it. We also would like to see that similar responses when other governments call for minority protections in India and this.
Give me a sense of what you see happen next, given that we have this interim government of sorts, which Professor Yunus will lead, that elections will happen at some point. The army, led by Army Chief Waqaruzzaman, is also a key part of the current dispensation in Bangladesh. How do you see this play out?
Well, I think this is again where India has a very important role to play. We know that Bangladesh has a history of military coups, so it is very important that the Bangladesh military support a democratic process, supports the police in ensuring law and order, but in a rights-respecting way. So this has to be the first step. The second, and that would also require, the Indian Army has a lot of deep connections with the Bangladeshi government, with the Bangladesh military, so it could be a military-to-military conversation as well. So that is something that should happen. We would encourage the interim government to take charge and quite quickly start restoring faith in institutions. Because a law and order crisis often happens when people believe that there is not going to be justice. So therefore, in our Hindi films, we used to say, "Kanun haath mein lena." Some of this is that, right? I mean, they want to punish people because they don't think these people will be punished. So that is the second thing that has to happen. There has to be a completely rebuilding of institutions so that they're independent and rule of law is established and faith in rule of law is established. And some of that is already happening in terms of the reforms to the judiciary. The judges have gone. There are new judges who are supposed to be more, not politically biased. So that should be take some steps over there. The economy needs to be stabilized. There are a lot of other challenges that has to happen. Educational institutions have to open. People have to go back to their lives. And then there has to be a process of absolute independent investigation. We are hearing that the government wants a UN-backed process so that it isn't considered partisan. It is something that India should definitely support as well, so that there is an independent investigation first into what happened during these protests and the numbers and the deaths that occurred, but also what happened in the past, the enforced disappearances and the extrajudicial killings, families that have been waiting for answers. That also has to be sorted out and developed. And the last thing that I will say is about the bureaucracy and the police. Too often in this part of the world, there is a colonial hangover where the bureaucracy and the police tends to follow the political leaders of the day, and that makes them appear biased. It is very important that the bureaucracy and the police remember that their role is not a political one. Their role is administration and law and order, and it has to be without prejudice.
Meenakshi, are you looking at what is playing out at the border as well? Because, there are reports that a lot of people from villages, Hindu Bangladeshis, are trying to get to the border, hoping maybe to even cross over. Is that a place that you're focused on? Are you looking at what is happening there? And how worried are you by the developments at the border?
No, I am a bit worried because I think that what happens is that, as I mentioned earlier, there is a tendency to dislike and distrust refugees. This has been going on, and not just in India, but everywhere. But certainly, because a lot of these communities will, for instance, end up in Assam, and then Assam has already had that weird NRC process to try and what they claim any Bengali speaker they believe is an infiltrator. So these are situations that have to be managed very, very carefully. Refugees have the right to be protected, and they must be protected. If these people are fleeing, no one flees their homes just because they want to. They flee their homes because they're really feeling a risk of life for themselves and their family members. So if they are coming to the border, they have to be protected, they have to be secured, and every refugee has the right to go home. And once it's safe, most refugees will go back. But there shouldn't be an aggressive, these people should be protected. There should not be an aggressive pushback because this sort of belief that Bangladeshis are pouring into India. Instead, there should be absolute protection for refugees. And this is India's history. So India should remember that history and protect refugees this time around this way.
With reports as of now are that the Bangladeshis are at the border and the BSF is sending them back. So the ideal scenario is that law and order is restored, trust is restored in Bangladesh, and anybody seeking to flee Bangladesh or Hindu Bangladeshis looking to flee should feel secure enough to go back, right? And India, if necessary, needs to be able to accept these people. Is that what you're saying, Meenakshi?
Yes, I think in the immediate, anyone in Bangladesh is in a very, very difficult situation. So, as I said, I mean, of course, Hindus are feeling particularly at risk, but also there are people who were other traditional Awami League supporters who might be feeling at risk. People who are feeling at risk and want sanctuary in India should be allowed into India. They should be kept in a special place, given protection, given health care, given food, let UNHCR deal with them, and then the situation will stabilize. Once the situation is stabilized and then these people are feeling safe enough to go back home, they must go back. That is the way that refugees should be handled. But they should not be stopped at the border. There should not be talk about, oh, these terrorists from Bangladesh are entering India. There should not be, oh, these Bangals are entering India and once again taking away our resources. These are conversations that have to happen not just in India but in many parts of the world.
And in this particular case, it's a politically awkward situation, isn't it? Because, Bangladeshis have always been the whipping boy for all bogies when it comes to border infiltration and Ghuspetia, and the politics that has played out. And today you have Hindu Bangladeshis who may need protection and want to come into this country, and then what do you do? So I think this is an interesting sort of space for the Indian government to find itself in, isn't it? A delicate one.
I don't think we should look at refugees by their religion or by their ethnicity. Refugees are refugees. And if we can treat them as refugees, that is probably a better way to deal with it, because otherwise, once again, there will be this conversation about bias. What India really needs to be seen right now to be doing is unbiased, rights-respecting leadership. Therefore, it should not be saying, oh, we'll take the Hindus, but we will not take Muslims. That kind of conversation will only exacerbate the situation. So if there are refugees, they have to be treated as refugees. They should be protected. UNHCR should be brought in. And then I do think that Bangladesh will calm down and there will possibly be some order soon. And when that happens, most of them will want to go back. I mean, this is not just true of the people that are waiting to come in now. I mean, if you talk to any Rohingya refugee, they will say they want to go back. Most refugees want to go back. You talk to a Tibetan, 3 generations later, a Tibetan will say they want to go back home. Refugees always want to go back to their home.
A quick question on this fear of, Jamaat-e-Islam, Bangladesh's Jamaat-e-Islam, and an attempt to see a new radicalized or a Muslim Bangladesh, whereas, we know, that Bangladesh was created because culture and language was given primacy over religious affiliation, isn't it? And that was, in a sense, the core of the creation, partly the core of the essence of why Bangladesh came into being. So today, in this current upheaval and this sort of vacuum or in this interim period, do you see the Jamaat-e-Islam and its attempts to create a Muslim Bangladesh is something that we need to look at apprehensively, and what kind of local support might it find?
Well, I mean, Jamaat-e-Islami has not usually won popular votes in Bangladesh. but they have a very strong organizational base. Are we seeing a radicalization in Bangladesh? Yes, we are. Similar to what we are seeing everywhere else. This is the problem, that the world today is turning more and more radical. So where somewhere we are seeing Hindu majoritarianism, in Sri Lanka we are seeing Sinhala Buddhist majoritarianism. So this is something that is happening everywhere, or what we are hearing from North America and Europe, which is that, oh, we are, Caucasians are being outnumbered by people that look like you and me, Anuradha. So therefore, this is happening everywhere, and it needs a rights-respecting approach, as opposed to one that is politically or religiously driven. So I think the answer to any kind of radicalization is almost always a democratic response, which provides for civil liberties, which provides for fundamental freedoms. That tends to will hopefully undercut this. But I'm sure that there is radicalization happening. We do know that even because there was so little political space under the last 3 terms of Sheikh Hasina's government, there was more radicalization even therefore, because people were so desperate that they were being recruited. So these are all issues that will have to be handled going forward, and handled with great sensitivity and care.
Right. Meenakshi, I think I'm going to say thank you and close this conversation here, but we'll keep checking in, because there is going to be so many changes that, that come into place. And I know you're going to be watching and studying very carefully. So we'll check in with you again. Thank you so much. We'll keep talking.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you very much for tuning in. If you're looking for deep conversations like this that give you a perspective on the complex times that we live in, please head to Anuradha Says. That's the YouTube channel where you will find all of this and more. Thank you for watching.